we are. Hi, I'm Elliot Margulies. I'm from the Midpen Media Center, and welcome to another one of our exchanges on Zoom. And if you're joining us by watching the live stream on YouTube, welcome. The eyes of the whole country are on our schools this month, whether they're going to reopen, how they're going to do that, whether they're doing distance learning, how they're going to do that as the fall term begins and as the pandemic still looms pretty big. So I'm so glad that we have 4 superintendents with us today from the Midpeninsula, San Francisco Midpeninsula, to talk about the challenges they've been facing and the preparations they've been making to meet those challenges. And with me, also, I'm going to introduce Gina Sudaria. She's the superintendent of Ravenswood City School District. And if you do have a lamp in front of you, turn it on just in case. That's better. And Dr. Don Austin from the Palo Alto Unified School District. Yeah, give a wave. Dr. Erik Burmeister from the Menlo Park City School District. And
not a doctor, but hello.
Oh, okay. And Dr. Mary Streshly from the Sequoia Union High School District up to the north of where I am.
Hello.
Thank you. And I'm going to jump right into 2 very quick questions that are probably foremost on people's minds. I'll borrow a phrase from your teachers. Raise your hand if your district is going to start the fall term with distance learning rather than in-person classes. So that is everyone. That means that if your child is wondering where to go on let's see, August 17th for Palo Alto Unified and Sequoia Union, and for August 20th for Menlo Park City School District, and August 26th for the Ravenswood District, not to the school. Send them to where their computer is hooked up and they can go to their distance learning class. The other quick question will be, how much do you want to reopen right after the health officials say it's okay? What is the earliest that you foresee following an okay from the county that you might reopen your district? So I'll start with Gina.
Good afternoon. We would want to first consider what the cases look like in our area in comparison to neighboring districts. Our community actually has a high positivity testing rate, and I know there's debate on whether or not you use that data, but there really is no other data to work from and work with.
You're going to look at numbers from your criteria rather than just getting the okay from the county.
Right. I think, before everyone was going to move into distance learning, before it was announced at the state level, I had reached out to our county superintendent as well, letting her know that even though some districts are going in our county would consider doing a hybrid or going in person, we might have to make this decision because of how it's impacted our community specifically, which we are made up of mainly Black and brown children and staff. And so we are actually more vulnerable to COVID.
I want to go to Dr. Austin. Don, when would you see a possible opening day?
Yeah, we have a predetermined earliest start date of October 12th. So yeah, we didn't want to get into the uncertainty of checking list every other day in the beginning. So we wanted to give ourselves a little bit of a landing strip there. So August 12th will be the absolute earliest for a whole scale return. We're unsure if we have the ability to bring back some smaller groups, including special ed, potentially earlier for the small groups. Of course, we have to be off of the watch list.
Menlo Park City School District.
Like Gina's district, we are a K-8 district, and we, there are unique needs related to being a K-8 school district, particularly related to childcare and some other factors. And we serve a slightly different population. I would say our parents are much more eager and certainly pressuring in some ways, shape, and form for us to consider opening up. And so our board is much more interested at this point in time in being responsive to the moment. And so at this point in time, the earliest that we would go back is September 8th. However, we would only do so at this point in time if we were not on the monitoring list.
Dr. Streshly, what about Sequoia Union?
So similar to Dawn and Palo Alto Unified, we gave ourselves a bit of a runway to have, a quarter, which is sort of like part of a grading period, so that we could, which is October 9th. And so our target is October 9th. I too believe that when you say open, that's it's a squishy term, because if you haven't noted yet, but you have 3 different types of districts here. We have K-8s, we have K-12s, and Sequoia happens to be a 100% high school district, 9-12. And large comprehensive high schools have proven quite difficult in terms of how to configure and fall within the health protocols and guidelines. They're called these stable cohorts. And how do you keep kids that have 5, 6, 7, 8 classes into a particular cohort is very difficult. So we gave ourselves the quarter. Likely we will too follow the watch list, but rather that what opening would mean would be gradual phase in, starting with special needs students, from our English learners to special ed to identified kiddos.
I will be asking a number of questions about distance learning, because that's certainly challenging in its own way. And then I'm going to be asking a number of questions about what specifics about reopening. Before we go there, I just want to, you've already alluded to some of the pressures that you've been balancing. You've got the health officials from the county and the state. You've got parents who really need to go to work or really need more help if their kids are at home. You've got teachers who are scared about re-entering a classroom that's pretty closed with a lot of children right in front of their face. And how are you sleeping at night? I'm reminded of the poem, Let Me Count the Ways, but that's about love. This is about anxiety. So I'm gonna start with you, Gina, but how have these pressures impacted you? How are you juggling?
Well, thanks for asking. I think that's actually how I've been coping, is checking in on individuals and how they're doing, and starting conversations by simply starting Zoom meetings by simply asking, how are things going? I think, Eric, we just recently had a conversation as well. Before we talk business, how are you doing? And I think it's really important to connect with individuals that you work with, especially when you're constantly trying to give direction and plan ahead and, cross out everything on your punch list before the few more days we have before school starts, just to make sure we connect on a personal level. And then professionally, I think it's just making sure that we communicate as much as possible what is the current state and why we're doing what we're doing, but making sure before we do it, we get the input from all of our stakeholders. That's something that we've done specifically in our district, is trying to reach out to as many stakeholders as possible, holding as many parent focus groups as possible before coming to a decision of why we're doing distance learning. I think many of us were ready to do the hybrid model and trying to figure out all those different cohorts, A group, B group in the morning, or every other day, every other week. What are we going to do? Grade levels coming in more frequently than other grade levels. So before we made that final decision, it was getting a consensus from the community. And I think that's what has helped me sleep at night about why we are going in the direction we're going on August 26th, which is distance learning.
Dawn, can you talk about your, I don't know about your sleep quality, but how it's been dealing with balancing the pressures, and does it change from day to day? Is everybody convincing you one way and then the other?
Well, in March, the first couple of weeks of March when we were still open, I had a full head of hair. It was flowing. This has ruined me. No, gosh, we've been gone so long that I've gained a bunch of weight, lost it, gained it back, and lost it again. So, yeah, physically, it's been awful. And I think, I was on a webinar for AXA. AXA is a professional organization for all administrators in the state of California. And like I tried to tell everybody on that too, if you're not feeling beat up right now, and like it's an ever-changing game and you don't have the rules to it, but everyone wants you to be perfect in it, then you're not in the seat. You're not treating us seriously if you're not feeling like that. So, every district has taken a slightly different approach. I spend a lot of time on the phone with superintendents across the entire state. I probably have a call list of about 100 that I check in with. So I'm doing constant calibration, trying to make sure that we're on the front end of things that are good, but not so far in front that we're alone, with one exception where we kind of did go out there a little bit and it worked out fine. But the hardest part of this is how many people see the sliver of the problem. I'm not knocking anybody. I mean, this is just human nature. They see the sliver of the problem that if that was just changed, it would make their life better. And then they write you and say, look, this is easy. How can you not see that if you just did fill in the blank, that's all you have to do. This is your number one priority. So just to give you a quick list, my number one priority is to take care of the safety and health of all of our employees. My number one priority is to get kids back into school. My number one priority is to work with 5 elected school board members. My number one priority, it's endless what everyone tells me. Look, this is easy. This is all you have to do is this. They don't understand the complexity of it, and they can't. I gotta tell you, I've never had a more prolonged period of uncertainty in any point in my career. Typically, you have problems and they're complex sometimes, but you can draw on previous experience and work through it. There's no previous experience for one day you're in school, the next day you're out, you're told it's going to be 2 weeks and it's been 6 months. There's no experience to draw on for that. So yeah, we'll have great stories 5 years from now, but for right now, this is a brutal time for anyone in the profession. And if you're in a leadership position within the profession, it's even tougher.
We have a shared experience. Our contexts are different, but our experience is very similar. I think Don's word of brutal is an excellent descriptor. And, I would say it's very nice of you to believe that we actually sleep and can sleep. It is, I mean, this is, we go to sleep, wishing our minds could turn off so that we could sleep and then wake up in the morning and it's the first thing we think about. This is more complex than anybody who has never done this could ever understand. And it is got to be one of the top 5 worst jobs to have during a pandemic, I would say. Not that that survey's ever been taken, but if it is, I'm sure superintendent is on there. And you know, I would say that it makes sense that this is hard. And the reason that I think people it would be helpful for people to understand that the reason this is so hard is because what we deal with is something that is the most personal thing to people in their lives, and that's their children. We are daily dealt a series of decisions where we are choosing the best of all the bad options. And that makes it really, really hard. And it's super challenging, both intellectually and emotionally. And at the end of the day, when all of this is over, you know, it will be, we will need some really, really good therapy.
Mary, you mentioned before we got started that your father was a superintendent for 30 years, but would not have been able to advise you on pandemic behaviors and choices. So what have you used as your guiding lights as you deal with the array of different needs and pressures?
The guiding light is family and reminding your staff and everybody to take care of each other, as well as our core mission, you know, to take care of our kids. And we have staff worried about taking care of their kids. And so there's just this compounding of elements. And so you have to trust in some of your gut instincts, but at the same time, the atrocity and the brutishness, the brutality of what we're in. You know, Sequoia High School District, we have excellent schools and we have excellent educators. And because this is so hard, and we have a very supportive, generous community, and because it's so hard to get this right, we are flogging each other, right? Because we expect to get this right easily most of the time. And the way the community and the staff that's not really had a history of being at odds, with the parents really desperate to have their kids in school and trying to find a sliver of information that can happen, and with our staff just responding in a myriad of ways to the pandemic. That's the other layer. How people are processing, conceptualizing what this is to them personally and their families runs the gamut. And so you can't just assume where people are coming from right now. You just have to try to assume it's from a good place. And but it's taken people to some dark places. Dawn talked about calibration, and that is the saving grace of superintendents right now. We try to stay close, but we're kind of clinging to our own little buoy in the middle of the ocean and then pulling each other onto this little life raft. Everybody's questioning their abilities. I mean, we're lifelong educators that have a lot of experience, and everybody's the first time at doing this. So coming up and thinking outside the box under duress, it creates resentment, it creates fear of self-efficacy all over the place. And so that's where the sleepless nights come from.
Thank you all for those answers, because I think they highlight a pretty lonely, and it's like you're not going to be able to satisfy everyone. And part of what happened, I noticed at least on 2 of your district websites, there were extensive details about going back to reopening the school on a smaller scale. And then just it seemed like in mid-July, it switched back to knowing that you were going to start the term with distance learning. Did that mean that your planning to that point was mostly focused on how to come back, and that it was only the last couple of weeks that you turned back to figuring out how can we do the best job possible with distance learning? Did that affect you?
I think it applies to everybody. We were definitely preparing for a hybrid model, but we were like, what if? And that what if did happen. So we were prepared for the hybrid model. We pretty much had our schedules worked out too. And we knew that we were going to be able to fall back on what we had done in the spring in terms of having a foundation to build upon and improve upon, because what we did in the spring was only survival mode. And as we coined it, crisis learning versus distance learning. But we knew that we could build upon that. And so, you know, as stressful as it was, it just seemed like we put a lot of work into something that we could have done. We could have been better prepared for August 26th if we knew we were going to do distance learning. So we could have been we'll be prepared for the 26th, but we could be in a better place if we spent our time preparing for strong distance learning curriculum, professional development throughout the entire summer versus planning the hybrid model.
But it was only, I don't know, a month ago when the governor came out and said, we expect people to be back in school. You know, here are all the reasons you should be back. The American Pediatrics Academy was saying kids aren't super spreaders and they're better off in school. Let's get them back. Well, and then all that changed, right? Like almost overnight. So I think one of the reasons we were all working on these different models is, first of all, there was not uniform agreement about what models were the best. I don't think there is a best on this one, but everyone knew it was going to be the hardest problem to solve. But for us, honestly, once they told us, look, you have to be closed and here's the criteria to come back, to some degree, it lifted a weight off our shoulders, and we could at least zero in, like Gina said, we can zero in there and say, okay, now we know where we're going. Let's do an outstanding job at it. And, you know, we were able to gear our professional development and stuff towards it. But yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride, and we've got a million examples of how guidance has shifted, and there's been contradictions, even from the same people speaking.
In May, we did a Zoom recording with 7 teachers from different districts. There was one from Ravenswood and 2 from Palo Alto Unified among them. But all of them talked about that some really essential ingredients were missing for them as they did lessons on Zoom or whatever platform they were using, and that it was not why they became teachers to do it that way, although they were trying to figure it out. Some of them talked about students that never showed up. Others, and I actually did a workshop for students sheltering at home where most of them didn't want to show on video. They used the chat. So what I wondered was, what has been in place, either within your district or between you, that identifies best practices for this kind of studies and learning? What are you getting inspired by, to the extent you can, with this fall term of distance learning? So Mary, could you start us off there?
The instructional part, thank you. It's my favorite part. I do want to start with saying, though, that I did have a reaction to your question that you just asked, because that's a place where things got really, really sensitive. No matter what the indications that we were following from the state, there was just this feeling of inevitability, a lot of crystal balls, a lot of that we need to go distance learning. obviously a lot of safety concerns. And so bubbling up in that was a little bit of resentment of why did we spend all this time planning this hard stuff that's really hard, the hybrid and coming back, when we could have just been focusing on perfecting distance learning. And so we got really caught in that vice of needing to do both. We are also fortunate to have a very rich professional development department and coaches. But we try to focus on our core goals and academic principles. What we didn't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater and just focus on the technology of it. Obviously that's a piece, but everybody knows technology is just a tool. It doesn't actually provide rigorous instruction. And so our core principles about engagement and rigor and quality interaction is really where we focused our online distance learning. And so really figuring out how we capture the kids. Our biggest worry, and I know all of the superintendents on this call are worried about engagement and getting them structure. And what do we do if the kids aren't online, and aren't there? And how do we get that, the way to monitor that, the data, the teams, to have a variety of ways to get them back engaged.
Are your classes going to be in real time where the teacher is there and giving the same amount of class time that they would have in the brick and mortar building, or is it different?
Yes, it's definitely different, but there's some terminology there. All of our teachers will be in the schedule that our students are in, and they'll be with the students for the entire class period. But we don't want them lecturing, the whole time. So there'll be a mix of what we're calling synchronous instruction, where the teacher will be putting them in breakout rooms and actually actively engaged, and also at times where they are available while the kids are actually working independently, which would be like a classroom where the teacher isn't, the kids are actually doing some independent work or some group work, and then they check back in. But the teacher is with the kids, whether they go off and online, whether there's other various ways to have them peer responding and peer editing during this time. So it's both.
Distance learning for the younger kids is different, and we have different challenges. Speaking for our district, is one of the things that we've really been focusing on is student engagement and learner agency, much longer than COVID has been around. But it really is highlighting our need to double down on those fundamental priorities. I think it becomes both a challenge and an opportunity for teachers to see learning as an opportunity to ask really, really good questions. So this is really an opportunity for us to think differently about how we have traditionally, and I say we as sort of like a public schools in general and educators in general, how we have thought about learning experiences, and then challenging our educators to be creative about how we inspire students to be curious learners, so that it's not about the amount of clock time that you have in front of a computer screen, but it's about how excited students are to come back to the computer screen to share what they've discovered or what they've learned or the answer they've found on their own or with a small group, with the rest of the class or with their teacher. And I'm not saying that's easy, but I'm saying if we can do that via a computer screen, imagine how much more powerful learning will be when we get to come back together. I hope that as we go through all of this, that the burden, that the challenge that we've had to encounter over the last several months and will over the next many more months will not be for naught. But that we have found a way to inspire kids thinking and learning virtually, such that when we get back in person, there's no classroom that's left unchanged. Because if we can do it virtually, where we don't have the ability to focus on obedience, then we can absolutely do it in person when we come back together in relationship with one another. So that's my hope.
Great. Gina, I've had the pleasure of working with a few of the teachers in your district, and I love them. They're great. But if I'm a teacher and I'm not feeling that my Zoom skills are up to snuff for a bunch of 10-year-olds, what do I do to get better at it? How can I find some support at the district level?
Right. I just first want to say kudos, Eric. I think you addressed that question very well. And more importantly, I also see a silver lining in what we had to go through, in the sense that for our parent engagement, the accessibility to be able to reach families, with devices and Wi-Fi hotspots, they've been able, at their convenience, participate in meetings that typically they would not have been able to participate in. Literally, I've had a father hold up his camera in the kitchen where he works to be part of our DAC-DLAC meeting. And our families have also been contacted by teachers either weekly or bi-weekly. And so that expectation of, if we are doing this now, then we want to continue that when we are back in the building. And I think I heard a comment, this is some podcast, we don't want to go back to normal, we want to reach for better. And so I'm very encouraged too of, if we're able to get through this, just imagine what we can do when we are face to face looking at our babies smiling at us. But for our teachers, if they need assistance, in our district specifically, I'm grateful that we have an instructional leadership team at 3 of our 4 sites. We're still hiring for our dual immersion school. But we are focusing on building capacity at our school sites. And so we do have teacher leaders that are going to be able to support teachers at each grade level. It's difficult when you're on Zoom, and especially if you're a teacher, maybe with only 1 laptop, you're trying to see your class while also looking at a web browser. And then, it's just challenging. And so, we want to make sure our teachers have the tools that they need to be able to deliver interactive instruction.
How do you combat the fact that, it's the students who have the least amount of support at home, or the least amount of technology, or the least amount of space in their house to actually set up and do their homework or listen to their teacher? How do you address that? And I don't mean to be one of those people keeping you up through the night that you're doing it all wrong. I know it's a very, very tall order, but what is going through your minds in terms of how to not lose kids and leave kids way far behind from all this distance learning? So Don, let's start with you.
The question that you asked is probably the most important question out there. If I had to rank all the things that I'm worried about, this is number 1. Palo Alto, just for context, has the most pronounced gap between advantaged and disadvantaged, and what that means, that I've seen anywhere I've ever been. So the prioritizing the needs of the students who need the extra help is top on our list, but it's also met with an undercurrent of, yeah, you can do that as long as it doesn't take away from my kids' experience. And when you go into something new, like a closure, everyone has anxiety. And, honestly, the people that are the most vocal are the ones that are primarily the most advantaged to start with in a school system. And really, what we're picking up is some fear that they're going to lose this advantage. It doesn't mean that fear and their love of their kids is any less important. It's all totally true. But the people we don't hear from, and in fact we can lose, are the people that are having trouble. They don't have a quiet place to work. They do, even on a good time when our schools are open, have to ride a bus an hour each way to get here. Um, I'm really concerned about the kids who can easily fall through the cracks. And now, without having face-to-face, all kinds of national studies saying, you know, when people are upset about screen time and the digital divide, well, I've got concerns about that nationally too. It's not a Palo Alto issue. We are blessed. We are well resourced, right? So we can take care of the digital devices. Of everything, this is the one that is our all hands on deck issue. And we're putting supports in place and really what I would call the extraordinary efforts to reach out. But we were hanging on by a thread as it was in good times as far as our achievement gap. I'm really scared to see.
Don, I
like.
super appreciate your candor, your honesty about this. And it almost sounds to me like part of the plan has to be beyond the school districts, and part of the plan has to be getting support throughout other areas of the community. I want to ask all of you if there are other thoughts you've had within the district, how you can support these kids that are the most vulnerable, but also if there are ideas that you've heard from the community at large, how they can plug in.
Sequoia is well-resourced, but we had a tremendous equity gap before the pandemic. And to think that it's not going to get dramatically worse is scary. It's nothing less than scary. When our teachers are gearing up to teach these courses, they want to think about them being in spaces that we're all in right now. A desk and a beverage and, you know, all the different things that you need. There's home environments we don't want to send our kids home to. We're happy, we wish sometimes we're a residential school system, because if we could keep them 100%, they would do a lot better. Some of the ideas, my steadfast one, and it's why I'm hanging on information from the state being forthcoming, is I think our campuses, these beautiful state-of-the-art 50-acre campuses, for them to be dormant is just catastrophic. And so if we can provide a space, if we can provide learning hubs, study hubs on our campuses, if we can provide some kind of ability to have our space be the healthy work environment. But our county has talked about countywide learning hubs at different areas. We've been in conversations with the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula. They're an amazing resource, and they're trying to figure out how they can connect in East Palo Alto with Gina's kids and my kiddos through to Redwood City. But if they can have a group of kids, then people are going to expect us to be able to have kids in contact. We're trying to figure out how to do welfare checks. The pandemic is really, I think, constantly about the fact that if we can't find kids, we need to go out in the community and find them. So who are those soldiers on the ground looking for the kids and re-engaging them, or finding out what the dynamic is so that we can transplant or get them in a place where we can. But there's a lot of folks that have, for safety reasons, to do it all distance. I just don't have trust that that's the way to find out what's going on with the families and what could be going on with the kids. Even if we may stay in distance learning longer than we hope, that we still have ways to host one-to-one small groups, office hours, mental health assessments, those kinds of things that kids need.
I know one study that was published last week in the New York Times found that 14 million children are hungry. I know there's so many statistics about how the pandemic has disproportionately impacted communities with lower income levels. And it's mind-boggling when you try to fill the gaps for parents that need childcare, that need food, that need rent money. But I'm assuming that you're hearing requests that the school district take a lead. What can be the role of a school district in dealing with these broader societal challenges? Gina, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'd like to add to Dawn and Mary's remarks. We obviously have a high number of the most vulnerable students. And so we've constantly, since March 16th, have been trying to problem solve how, most importantly, to reach the students and to make sure that at the very basic level, they are safe, they have meals, and they have connectivity and devices, right? So that was our first mission. And Mary's right, like we have to go out into the community, to the homes, to make sure that they are aware of what is happening in our schools, they being the families. So if we weren't able to connect with families via phone or text message, emails, websites, communication through Zoom, then we did home visits. And so that is the task that we are putting on ourselves, and that I've charged our staff to do, is ensure that we reach our families. So every adult on campus, and this goes back to Erik, where we do better when we are back in person after this whole experience, is because the expectation is if every adult on campus is connecting with families and has a caseload to ensure they're, is kind of doing a wellness check to make sure the basics are squared away, then imagine when we're back in person, the frequency and the connection there that could benefit, and make sure there's a constant loop of communication. Then there's the need to support families like with rent and what have you, and being really in tune with the community, the services that are within the city and within the neighboring, with the neighboring organizations and partners like Live in Peace, who's supporting our families with rent, and the Samaritan House. So just being very in tune with the resources that are within the city. Another idea is, if we are able to have volunteer support, then we can have them be part of the Zoom class and be part of a breakout group, so that teacher can work with the smaller group in a breakout session and the volunteer can work with the other group, just to help with engagement. There's so many ideas out there to help mitigate this achievement gap, and it is going to be dependent on us partnering with city, partnering with all the organizations. The district cannot do it by itself.
You have a 10-year-old kid who's sat for an hour or so, maybe 2 hours already with his teachers, and he feels some ants in his pants. Is the plan at this point that you're in your desk, you eat your lunch at your desk, you have recess at your desk? How are you thinking through the reopening with such young kids who have such high energy?
Well, first, I have to acknowledge that I have a 6-year-old son and a 10-year-old son who attend our schools. We live in the school district, so we experience this from a lot of levels. And what I will say is that if you have a 10-year-old on a screen, or if you have a 10-year-old in a classroom sitting down for over an hour, you're doing something wrong, right? And it isn't, what is true over a screen is generally also true in the classroom as well, is that learning is a very active experience.
How do you work with kids that young and keep them socially distanced?
Well, we did it in summer school, and it worked out okay. Kids are the most resilient and adaptable beings on this earth. It's the adults that are usually the problem. We have to adjust. We have to adjust our expectations, and we have to adjust our ways of doing things. Kids will figure it out. Kids will manage. They did it in summer school. We had 0 COVID cases in summer school, and we had 100%, no matter what age, 100% mask wearing, 100% attendance, 100% engagement. They will figure it out.
How do you envision something like lunch or recess periods? How do you manage the social distance? What will be in place?
Well, yeah, I think we gotta be realistic, right? So we have all these rules right now, and I'm going to say something now that when people drive around and look, they're going to see it just jump out at them. Yeah, I live right over by the Baylands, paths out there, and I've been out there recently on weekends and seen groups of 20 kids with parents walking together. Okay. And then on my way back, I passed Greer Park, and there are soccer clinics going on, no masks, kids all over each other, adults sitting over on the side. Then I go downtown to Cal Ave or to University, outdoor seating for restaurants, which by the way, I enjoy, but people mix tables, which is one of the rules everyone's violating. They're walking around, milling around together. So I think number one is when we come back and when there are cases at schools, because we will come back and there will be cases. Boy, I'm hoping that the schools aren't held to a standard that nobody else seems to be honoring. There are going to be interactions. There should be no expectation of perfection on this one. I think distancing our campuses, I'm sure everyone's are marked for when we return. They have the big, stickers on the ground about 6 feet spacing, but really, I understand the rules and I'm treating it seriously, but I'm not sure I want to be in a world where 2 kids can't, play catch with a ball, or we teach kids that sharing is bad and that they can't see their teacher's mouth move. If we can't come back in a way where school isn't scary, I'd rather not come back for a little bit. So yeah, there's a balance. There's a balance in there somewhere.
But is there a plan in place for the cafeteria, for example?
Yeah. So I'll just give you some real quick hitters. Cafeterias won't have a choice. You'll go in, you'll have a grab and go lunch. It'll be pre-prepared. You'll come back, you'll sit in a designated area with your cohort, small groups. I'm talking about elementary school. High schools, good luck, right? One thing I've learned as a longtime high school principal, your ability to control everything that happens is much less than what you hope they think it is. They're going to go say hello to each other. They're going to hug each other. They are going to date. They're going to hold hands, and they'll either do it on campus or immediately after, but that's just the way the world is.
And the desks in the classrooms, are they all like measured apart from each other? Is that all part of the plan?
They are, but the reality is at high school, you're going to rotate kids through. We are not going to be able to sanitize classrooms in between each period in 10-minute breaks. It's just not going to happen. So there is going to be more exposure than sitting at home if, by the way, they're sitting at home right now.
What policies are you leaning toward or will be dictated to you when, as Don said, inevitably somebody does come in and has COVID? Does the whole school close down? Does that class close down? Does contact tracing take place? Is there any plans already made in that regard?
The county has offered a pandemic recovery framework, and it provides guidance on how to address exactly this. And so we would follow that, and definitely involves contact tracing, and determining on the extent of that will determine if we would need to have the entire class quarantined or the entire school.
once it's clear that the numbers are under control in both of our counties, I'm confident that our schools will be some of the safest places out there. And when and if COVID enters, it will be from the outside, not from the inside.
Have you found some unsung heroes in this process? Has anybody done something in your district for your kids, for your parents, that you didn't expect, that really sort of gave you a new level of hope and appreciation? Does that come up for any of you? Just raise your hand and then we'll, yeah, Gina, has that?
Yes, like I mentioned before, we were able to, we can't do what we do without the support of our community and the partners, but our essential workers from the get-go, especially our child nutrition and education workers who, have distributed meals, and then our transportation who actually deliver the meals, they did not skip a beat since March 16th. And they actually have pride themselves on being able to report to work and support our families in such a way, because as you know, many of our families depend on school meals.
First of all, I want to say there's this national narrative out there about teachers unions and classified unions not being cooperative or what have you. That has not been our experience here. Our folks, want to get back. They want to get back safely. But our union partners have been exceptional. The two positions that I would say whose jobs have changed so dramatically, in addition to what Gina shared with the nutrition services folks, are our nursing staff and our custodial staff. And it is incredible what the pressure that they have been under, the uncertainty that they have been under, and just taking on these new unknown challenges and unexperienced challenges has been pretty remarkable.
Right out of the chute, we closed on a Friday. Monday, we had no students for one day to prepare for what we were going to do starting on a Tuesday. And Tuesday at noon, we had prepared and distributed 600 meals on the first day with people that were just scrambling around. Went and visited, and they put me to work because they needed to. And people with great attitudes, right? And we didn't know. I mean, we were literally pulling stuff off of shelves in the back and stuffing them into bags and passing them out. And those, the system came, but our food service workers were the first ones to say, okay, we know we don't have a great system. How are we going to get this food in people's hands? And they led with purpose first and figured out the system afterwards. So while there's plenty of people to thank, that's the most immediate because it was the first one up.
Are you changed from these past 6 months? Are you going to be a different superintendent, a different person from this when you resume having kids in a school? So let's say post-vaccination days and all that. Is there going to be a change in how you prioritize and view your role? So Gina, I'll put you on the spot just in case you have to leave.
I think we're all going to be changed from this, definitely. And I mentioned it before, like, I don't want to go back to the normal, especially in light of the social justice issues that are in the forefront. I know too that we'll be having different teacher moves, implementing different teacher moves, making sure our content is culturally relevant to our Black and Brown students here in Ravenswood. And so there's so many things that I think we will definitely be doing differently moving forward. And as a superintendent, be very conscientious of just the decisions that we make and policies that are approved, that it's anti-racist work. And more importantly, that we put the best education in front of our students that's engaging, appealing, and will get them to where they need to go.
The pandemic has really highlighted the disparities in educational. We've always known that the disparities in educational outcomes, but they've also really noted the disparities in educational inputs. And I think that all of us are going to be changed, professionally as superintendents and our identities and what we value and prioritize and how we spend our time and so forth. But I also think that public education as a whole, at the local level, the state level, and the national level, is really experiencing a reckoning, and it should. And I'm glad that we are. And if our communities didn't understand the importance of public education as an equalizing factor in moving forward in an anti-racist and more equitable society, then I sure hope they do now. And if they don't, then I think the way that I'm changed is by making sure that they're constantly reminded.
So on top of the pandemic, it sounds like you've been very impacted by all the focus ever since the recent killing of George Floyd on how that trickles into every age level and every institution like the schools. Thanks for that answer. And we'll end with Don, your thoughts. Besides getting a full night's sleep, we hope, what might be changed in your outlook as a superintendent?
It's funny, I've been thinking about my answer. It's going to sound terrible, but it's the only answer that's coming to me, so it must be true. I've been humbled. I got to tell you, I thought I had seen about everything I'd see, and not to sound just horribly arrogant, but I thought, I got most stuff handled. I've seen it. I took the right steps. I've got a great tree, mentors, and this has just absolutely humbled me, and in a good way. I mean, I had to come to terms with the fact that I don't have every answer right now. And in fact, I feel like I've probably come up empty on a bunch of things. I've had to say, I don't know, more this year than any time in my entire career. And one thing I've learned is, if people know you're trying and your answer is, I don't know, they'd rather hear that than a make-believe answer or a sugar-coated answer. So, yeah, I think, dropping the filter down, not having to worry about being as polished all the time, and instead just being real and saying, yeah, this is unlike anything, is something I hope I can just stay grounded with. I think if anything, it's refocused, recentered me a little bit. So like a lot of things in this, when it's all over, it's not all bad.
It's no question you're all navigating uncharted waters that are in flux, that keep changing even as you do your best to chart a course. And you are finding an inner hero in yourself just by leading your schools through this, and the families and kids that depend on you. And the teachers, of course, are right at the forefront with you. So thanks for the work you do, and thanks for spending some very valuable time with us here today. Take care.